But just look up how to spell this. Like, this is one of those things that if you have dyslexia, it like really like just pisses you off with English. Because English is just this really fucked up language that doesn't make any goddamn sense. So let's see, Rimworld Garanlin? So it's a pod. English sucks. Like, I have an English, like I have a degree in English, and I can tell you, like, the fuck? Why would pressing enter make it go away? Like, English sucks. The thing about English is that it is kind of just a conglomeration of a bunch of different languages. Oh yeah, Monty Python's hilarious. So it's a Gronlund pod. Okay, let's try Sprout. So here's the problem with English, and this is why it's such a dog shit language. So English starts with like Anglo or Saxon, one of those two. It's a combination of a lot of things. So it starts there, and that's fine. And if it was just an evolution of those two languages, it would make a whole lot of sense. It would have a lot of... It would have that depth that you see in, say, French and German and Italian and Latin and Greek. These original languages that are not a composite of anything. They tend to have a lot of depth to them. However, English is more of a Creole language, and so what a Creole language is where you just take a bunch of languages and you sort of combine them together. So with English, so we have Anglo-Saxon language, and there's a little bit of Scandinavian in there from when the Vikings came over, and then there's some German in there as well. But the big problem was when the French showed up, because the French showed up with the Normans in like, what was it, like 800 CE, and they proceeded to completely, they proceeded to conquer essentially what is now Britain, what is now the UK for the most part, if not entirely, and they put in French as the court language. So here's the fucked up thing: you have French as the language of the courts, you have you have like Anglo stuff as language of the people, you have Latin as the language of science, and these three things just sort of influence each other. Europe's kind of nice because there's a big melting pot, so if you meet any Europeans, by American standards, they're a polyglot because they probably speak some German, they probably speak some French, they probably speak some like Italian, they probably speak some English, and they might speak some Swedish. Some. Enough to where they can probably figure out what to ask. But one of the things that's pretty common amongst all those is that they speak a little bit of English, because that's sort of the language of business. So, okay, so English. So I've been talking about the nice parts. So English, it's a composite of a bunch of different languages, but why English is so fucked up is that it doesn't do what a lot of other languages do. Example, in English, yeah, the British have a tendency to do that. I think it was explained with Empire Theory, where it's like someone comes in, and if they're the current like reigning empire of the planet, they more or less can just take whatever they want, and the people don't like it too bad, so that's what they do. But case in point, fun part about English. So cow meat is called beef. If I remember correctly, beef comes from French, and cow comes from Anglo. Why is it called laundry? Because laundry comes from French. So there are a lot of things, like, but there are also things that kind of work, like how would you hard translate parfait? Upside down? I've never had a parfait, but if I understand correctly, it's got like a more solid top, and it's more like jello-ish underneath that. So you probably describe that some way. But the real thing that comes into play here is in English, we just sort of adopt things, and we just sort of adopt rules. So you end up with French rules and Latin rules. Latin rules are usually pretty phonetic, so that's nice. And German rules and Japanese rules. Like it's just a big composite of a bunch of different languages. And in a way, that's really nice, because that grants you a whole lot of versatility in your language. But in other ways, that's absolutely terrible, because now no one knows what rule you're using. So this is why when you look at English, this is why like the A, for example, we also got rid of all our accent marks, so that's a fun one. For those of you who don't know, when you look at other languages that are using the same sort of alphabet that English uses, you know, so they have like these chevrons over letters and like a different mark. For example, like in Spanish, you have the N with a tilde over it, and that makes a ñ sound, like español. So that's where all that comes from. The problem is that that's all kind of completely lost in most of English, at least on the American side. Maybe it's still present on the British side. Like, we don't have besets anymore. Beset is like, it looks like a B, but it's not. It looks like a capital B, but it's not a capital B. So, yeah, it kind of just is what it is. But, yeah, it's a complete disaster, to put it lightly. And yeah, it just is what it is. So what other languages do is they have a rule where after like 10, 15, 20 years, they will then go wear this at some point. After like 10, 20, 30 years, they will eventually implement a language into their vocabulary. Well, they will implement a word into their vocabulary using their own terms. So, for example, in German, like they might have once used the term machine gun, and now they use their own version of that. A computer is... I forget what computer is in French, but it essentially just comes down to something like automatic tabulator or something like that. Even though it doesn't really tabulate anything. Well, it can tabulate, but you